Hello, everybody. Welcome. If anybody wants to put where they're coming from in the chat, that would be great. It's so good to see so many people. And we have fabulous lineup of poets reading today. So I'm going to give us just a few minutes to admit people in the waiting room. Wow, we're seeing people from Santa Clara, California, from Waterford, Connecticut, a couple of Connecticut, some England, some Rockport, Maine, and I'm here in Camden, Maine. So looks like we're from Ontario, Canada, from Colorado and Georgia, from New York and Virginia. This is great. Wonderful to see all of you. We have a very full program, so I'm going to get started and introduce myself. I'm Meg Weston. I'm co-founder and director of the Poets Corner. And if you're new to the Poets Corner, just to tell you a little bit about it, I founded it along with Catherine Seitz, my co-founder, in June of 2020. If you remember, June of 2020, we were all sheltered in. We were desperate for community, and we're both writers. So what we decided was to create a platform for people who like to read and listen to and hear poetry and short prose. And it's mostly poetry, but we do occasionally have a prose reading. And we host a reading usually on the second Sunday of every month and on Zoom. And then we've grown to, there are 2,500 people on our mailing list in this wonderful community of poets. And we've had some fabulous poets read, and we've had people who this is their first time reading in any platform. So it's wonderful to have that mix of people just excited about poetry and about writing and about the word, written and spoken. So to let you know about a couple of upcoming events. Today's event I'll speak a little more about in a minute, but we did it in collaboration with Page Gallery, which is a wonderful gallery here in Camden, Maine on Bayview Street. And they curated an exhibition of a variety of different artists, and they put the work online as well as hung it in the gallery. And we invited people to write poems to that. And we got 170 some submissions of poems. And then the artists selected some, and we selected some here at the Poets Corner. And the ones that were selected by the poets are reading here on Zoom. And the ones that were selected by the artists will be read in person in the gallery on November 19th on a Saturday afternoon at 1:00. And some of the poets will be there to read it in person, and some it will be read by someone else because not everybody is in Camden, Maine. But it's just so much fun to have the artist selection, the poet selection, and get to hear so many different responses to writing ekphrastic poetry. And, you know, people were telling me, Kirsten told me that people would wander in the gallery and ask for a painting to be taken off the wall so they could really study it. And then I know people were on Zoom, you know, or on the web studying it that way. And it's so great to see your responses to that. So a few other things coming up. Our next reading will be on the first Sunday of December, December 4th, which is Rilke's birthday. We'll have our second annual Celebrating Rilke event, which happens to fall on his birthday, with Mark Burroughs, who is a renowned award-winning translator of Rilke and a scholar of Rilke and a poet himself. And he'll be joined by Padraig Otwama of the On Being podcast, which many of you I know and love. And he was with us last year. He's terrific. And also Barbara Mahaney, another poet, will join us or join Mark for that conversation. In January, we'll have Poems of the Night Sky. So another wonderful event. I hope you'll keep coming back for those. But today, I want to celebrate the 12 poets that are reading for us today, whose poems were selected. And some of them wrote to the same artwork and some of them wrote to different artworks. So you'll get to see how different people respond to the same things. And what was so interesting is the artist selections and the poet selections, there's very little overlap. So I think there were 15 people selected for the gallery reading and 12 selected here. So in all, I think there's maybe one or two that are duplicated. So we hear 27 different ways of responding to works of art. So we're going to get right started. And I want to introduce our very first poet reading, who is Sheila Aldous, who is joining us from Devon, England. Sheila, please kick it off. Thank you.
It's lovely to be here with you all. I'm really looking forward to reading my poem to you. I'd like to thank the artist Mark Sheppens, because it was an intriguing work of art. And what attracted me to it was the potential for its sinister side. So I'd like to...
Just 1 second. We want to get the artwork on the screen too. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. Go ahead, Sheila.
So we can chat later on about a bit more of the motivations behind it, if you like. And I'll go right ahead and read to you, if you like. So my poem is called Night Calls By. The door opens and it crawls in on its belly, laughs on the blanket of the street, twists the sheets, runs its horns through the quivering interior as I lie trapped and breathless. Neon lights flash from a dangerous highway, and for a moment, a mouth contorts, asking if I want it darker, and all I wish for is deep, deep sleep. And then I see his face, the slashes of blue, crooked folds of night, jagged dark oil on linen. Thank you.
Wonderful, Sheila. It's just such a joy to hear it in your voice. You've read this poem several times, and I love hearing it in your voice.
Thank you.
So, that's great. Our next poet wrote to the same work of art. So Annaliese Jakimides. Did I get it right, Annaliese?
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay. If you would read next. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And I find it so fascinating. Well, first of all, thanks for asking me to be here. And I find it fascinating to read a poem that is to the same artwork. So it's coming up on the screen. Here we go. On the Manor of Shadows, after Mark Sheppens, Untitled, February 4th, 2022. Each shadow attends to its own hunger, wrestling time while the woman clips light every day in a new way. Rustling somewhere deep, spelt seeds balance in those thin, lemony cracks. She holds all the stories in her body, spilling them only when the spokes, columns, zigzags make a shiny necklace of personal bones. Inside, she hooks air, loops words, hand on shoulder, little burrs of love. Shadowed streams tumble wide, celestial holes open, witness to her joyful movement through the broken house. Thank you.
Thank you, Annaliese. What a joy to hear these very different poems and very evocative from this same work of art, which is a very abstract work of art. So it invites you to go in whatever direction you'd like to go. I loved hearing those. Our next poet is Matt Bernier. And Matt is joining us from Pittsfield, Maine, I think. Welcome, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Meg. I'm going to be responding to the piece of art, Emily, by Christopher Murr, which is a painting. And my poem is called Breaking Up with Emily. The first time I drank tequila, I passed out and dreamt of Emily. We were still dating then, so I picked her up at her big yellow house in Amherst, Massachusetts, and drove straight through to Arizona, not talking much, watching changing leaves as though knowing our affair wouldn't survive a New England winter we knew was coming. Storm clouds building over the prairie, like dust billowing from vast herds of bison, we thought of as muses, stampeding hooves, scribbling manically in the earth and leaving deep and lasting depressions. Me tipping over love's lantern with my heretical free verse. Drinking tequila out of teacups without saucers until we arrived at Arizona's Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument at bright midday, regretting Emily's dark dress under the desert sun and my thirst. So when the snowy egret appeared, walking on water, Emily spoke of the mirage. Look, there's hope, that thing with feathers. And when I awoke, just as the cacti started playing hymns for Emily, my heart and head both ached. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I love the imagination and that this evoked, and this poem tells this story that's just embedded in the image. Thank you. Our next poet is Beth Fox, coming to us from Wolfboro, New Hampshire.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. And part of the thrill for me was getting to know Brenton Hamilton's work. I did not understand this kind of artwork, this photography. He uses a historic process in his photography. And I guess that's what drew me back over and over again to this piece. It's just like the artist reaching for art. And as part of this, I was also reading Lee Young Lee at the same time. So I think that the poem came together with those thoughts. Brenton's piece is called Reaching for the Nightingale. And my piece is When the Nightingale Sings, with acknowledgement to Lee Young Lee, who says, the real subject in poetry isn't the voice. The real subject is the silence. In the night, the nightingale sings long. I think he must be hungry, yet his longing sings on. Sometimes I awake hungry for words, so hungry I forget to eat. I take 2 baskets, one for peonies, a beach rose, and some lemon thyme to see how the light hits them. In the other basket, I put verbs, words of turns, rises and strums that roll against each other while I walk. Like the early bird who gets a word, I reach, swallow whole. More come. I catch phrases, only to let them go, surprised when they give back their rich silence.
Thank you, Beth. I'm so glad you discovered Brenton's work. I love his work, and it's a lovely poem written in response to that. Our next poet will be Kathleen March. All right, Kathleen, where are you coming to us from? You're from Brunswick?
Yes, I'm coming from Brunswick, Maine,
Great.
after many years in Orono, Maine, at the university. And the only thing I want to say before I read is that the very first poem I had published was written as a mature person after going to the art gallery at the University of Maine and looking at one of Michael Lewis's paintings. And I think a lot of people in Maine and beyond know Michael's work. So when I was looking at these paintings, the first one that drew my attention and I kept coming back to was Violets and Bedstraw Beneath Spirea by Hannah Berta. And the title is Shifting Violets. Kaleidoscope of winter or spring, pushing eyes to think deeply. Pulse of small lilac, offbeat hearts, in snow, in air, in distance. The retina fragments, pauses, circles, hidden waters. Tiny darkness sifts and slips. It cannot be round or cold. But ice coagulates at water's edge and spins soft shards. Thank you.
Just beautiful, Kathleen. Thank you very much. And I actually went a little out of order here. So our next poem and our final poem before we take a short interlude of conversation is Margaret Habermman reading from Belfast, Maine. Hi, Margaret.
Hi. Can you all hear me?
We're good.
Okay, I'm so glad to be here. The last time I did this, I was sitting in my garage. And I'm in Belfast, Maine. And the painting that I picked is Apple Tree by Brian James. And my poem is called Black Oxford, which is a variety of apple that was first discovered in 1790 in Oxford County, Maine. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that it's a cross between a Hunt Russet and a blue pearmain. Black Oxford. Gradually, it is the apple trees you remember, the luminous, ordered mess of a spring orchard back in the Berkshires, west of Belchertown, at the place called Two Tree Hill. We lay beneath blossoms shimmering at night and thought we knew something about time and age, certain we could carry the glimmer of the trees beyond that place in our worn denim pockets. and the hermit trees out near Deer Isle, dwarfed by succession and neglect, sour and mottled apples falling before their time, a carpet of what's left behind. Still reaching, marking the path of an abandoned farm, stopping, listening, hoping for an answer that the old tree will tell you how you got there. Or the black Oxford, standing guard at the home you were so desperate not to leave. For decades, we fought against the things that made it weak, picking off the strange beetles that dropped to the ground as the shadow of a hand came near, gently carving holes with the tip of your knife into bark, dislodging unwelcome bearers of fragility and disease. That fall before we left, defying the past, the apples came in multitudes, spheres of black burgundy, slivers of green, each branch holding the impossible. You remember. We sat in the grass just beyond, slicing an imperfect fruit into little moons, passing them between us, reveling in the mix of sweet and tart and what it took to get there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Margaret. We're going to take just about 5 minutes here before we hear the next 6 poets read. Those were such intriguing poems, and I'd like to hear from any of these folks that have already read. You know, some of you tell a story. You start out from the painting and you go into a narrative story, and some of you really play off the imagery in the painting or photograph or whatever. And I'd like to hear sort of how you approached writing an ekphrastic poem. Anybody in this first group want to take that question?
Was the question, this is Kathleen, was the question about narrative versus another way of approaching the painting?
Yeah, what was your approach? You know, I noticed that some were more telling a story and some were more, you know, just getting immersed in the images. So what was your approach, Kathleen?
Well, it's interesting because I write more fiction, but there's a lot of art and poetry and a lot of quoting of poets in my fiction. But when I look at a painting, let's say a painting, and want to write about it, it always comes out very quickly, almost like immediately. And it's always what the image says to me. There's no story to it. It's not a story. A poem is, well, that's also because I worked with avant-garde poetry and trying to see, and Cubist poetry, trying to see how language could do what painting could do, what images could do. So when I saw the violets and bedstraw beneath Spirea, it was, how can I express this dose isn't the word, effusion of color, but a controlled color. And that's what happened. It came out all at once. And it spoke to me very deeply.
Nice.
So that's, I could say much more, but I won't.
Thank you. Margaret, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, my poem was also happened to be selected by the artist this time around. And we just exchanged some emails about the art and the poem. And it seemed to me that what I love about this exercise is it really is about a conversation. And I think writing is always a conversation, but it's this particular conversation with the artist and with what they've created. And for me, it's which image kind of draws me in, and then just letting it percolate.
Nice. And I was thinking, Sheila or Annaliese, did you want to, what was it like for you to hear somebody else's response to the same work of art?
It was fantastic. I love to hear a completely different take on it. It was really brilliant. I suppose in a way I do look for the dark in something. A lot of my poetry does tend to be that way. I mean, not all of it, but a lot of it does. And with this, there was a sort of psychological response from me. I like to see the potential, as I said before, of the sinister side. The closed shutters, it seemed to me like shutters were closing us out or closing us in. And it was a sort of hidden dark energy that was there that I could imagine behind it. A lot of it's imagination, obviously. You know, it was darker. Obviously, I'm very aware of Leonard Cohen and obviously his influence in that particular part of it. You know, he wanted darker. And he would say that, and I brought that into the poem. But it's just an intriguing piece of work. And I've had a look at some of the work he does. And it does tend to be similar. He has a whole range of those pieces of work. You know, what about you, Annaliese? What did you think?
You're muted, Annaliese.
I think that what happens is when you're working from something that is not literal, that it's not of the world that we normally relate to as humans, you are drawn into something that is rhythmic. There's a color rhythm, there's a sound rhythm. There are all kinds of senses that rise up for me when you react to something like that. And for me, in this one, there was a sense, if you look at the piece, you'll see it, there's a sense of looking at it long enough that there's an opening and a dissolution. You can't stare at it anymore, and you enter someplace, and there's a story there. It's just a matter of being patient enough and showing up long enough for the story to reveal itself. And I will say this, Sheila, there's a darkness sort of in mine too. There's that sense of hunger. There's the sense of the necklace of personal bones. It's just different. So it's fascinating to hear somebody else's take on it. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you all. I'm going to get back to our reading, and we'll have more time for questions from our participants. You can put them in the chat, and I'll try to scan the chat also. But for now, we're going to go back to our readers, and we're going to start with Robbi Nestor. And Robbi's joining us from Lake Forest, California.
Thank you. Thank you. This poem's called Watching Pins, which is also the title of a photograph by Sal Taylor Kidd. The mind is always brewing something, tracing shape-shifting menageries in clouds. Any plain ingredients, flour, water, and a bit of yeast and salt, plus time, can rise to the occasion, becoming a new thing. So a handful of steel pins dropped on a table spurs the mind to summon forces far beyond itself. As sages once scanned the entrails of a bird, thrown sticks or tea leaves at the bottom of a cup for wisdom that could change a nation or affect a life. What emerges depends upon the mind at work, maybe a strategy to solve a city's woes, a way to plan political maneuvers, or a play in sports. Philosophy and science are full of sudden insights of this sort, like Newton's apple, Archimedes bending over water rising in a tub. The chemist Auguste Kekule learned the benzene atom structure from the sudden vision of a snake swallowing its tail. In the pandemic, when the rules of ordinary life were all suspended and time became the most plentiful commodity, we could stare at nothing like a cat intent on tracking birds outside the window. People looked back on their lives, hoping to mend old rifts, contacting former friends or enemies, the quarrels long forgotten. We changed like dough rising at the back of a warm stove. Sequestered in our homes, we braided our loose threads into a pattern, wrote plays, made a family, discovered special gifts we didn't know we had, found power at the tips of our own fingers.
Lovely response to this photograph. Thank you,
Thank
Rob.
you. Thank you. It's sort of meta, I think.
Yeah, that's a good description. All right, our next poet is Lindsay Rockwell, and Lindsay is joining us from Northampton, Massachusetts.
Good evening, everybody. It's really wonderful, kind of amazing to be here amongst this extraordinary community of artists. So my poem is after David Graham Baker's Lillian. Spectacular to be made from marrow, to love the burning world and susurration of aspens, and how sun startles black-bottomed clouds, then sky becomes a painting. Such kindness catches my breath off guard, and sun-drenched too. Sometimes I lie face up in open water for hours, and I count my breath and lose my skin. And as I reach for air, I see here and there a dragonfly flit. And then I only wish I didn't feel so lonely and love the burning world so much that soon I swim and swim in open water, counting how many times my heart stops. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. I love that. As a swimmer, it was just so evocative to me, and great painting too. Thank you. Next up is Meghan Sterling, and Meghan's joining us from Gardner, Maine.
Thank you, Meg. The painting that I responded to was the painting Blue Kitchen with Sweet Corn by Susan Lichtman. And I'll wait till it's up. All right. Uh-oh. I need to be able to see my poem. Here we go. It's titled Blue Giant. Oh, mother, my first teacher, how you slid through light as dinner approached. Dusk as blue as the bruises you pressed on your thighs. Dusk holding the full hour of you in its walls. What did I want more than the fix of your sky? The field where we were lost between the tall stalks of corn like pillars of stone. But the kitchen, the dark, It had borders, blue and white as a flag. It wore its edges like wind in your breath. Your hair bright as the moon through a dirty glass. Is there anything more beautiful than things that are leaving? You could have been all of it. Field, sky, star. Thank you.
Thank you, Meghan. Oh, I just want to take a deep breath after that. Get lost in all that blue. Next up is J.C. Solzenko, who writes as A. Garnett Weiss. And I'm not sure where J.C. is joining us from. Where are you from, J.C.? Oh, you're from Canada. That's right. Ottawa or Toronto. You'll have to unmute.
Thank you. Thank you, Meg. Yeah, I'm in the eastern part of Toronto. Why will it tell me still I can't see anything? It won't let me unmute myself. I did. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me this chance to be part of this group. I'm enjoying listening and learning as a result of being here today. This is the image that my poem responded to. It's by Mark Hansen and Oil on Paper, and it's called Atmospheric One. And this poem is a cento. I use this pseudonym Garnett Weiss for my centos and found poetry. And centos are poems which, in my case, use lines unaltered from the work of other poets, just changes made in punctuation for the sake of grammar. So I'll read the poem and then I will tell you the provenance of the lines. Again, after Atmospheric One by Mark Hansen. Repeatedly, now in a dream, it is a malady of time, provoked again into movement, splitting with absolute contour and volume the fog and drizzle of early morning. I pretend to fewer and fewer memories of a luckless, accidental order mostly lost, a new century for confusion hovering against the turquoise horizon. And this is the deep future, the birds gone silent with an element of grief no one can conceal. The title and 12 lines which follow it are drawn from individual poems in the Quotations of Bone by Norman Dubie, published by Copper Canyon Press in 2015. Thank you very much.
Very beautiful. And I love that we have a cento in this mix of very different poems and another approach, which brings in multiple artists, you know, the artist that did the painting, the artist that created the poem, and then the artist that you draw from in that. It's quite beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, who's next? Nancy Sobonik.
Hi, Meg. Thank you so much for the invitation to share my poem. I was really drawn to this this photograph in black and white by Sal Taylor Kidd, and I felt that the use of shadow and light in it really was very evocative to me. And so once it's up on the screen, I'll start reading. Is it up? I can't.
Yes, it's there
Okay.
now.
Sorry. Petals for wings. She presses gladiolas, white as a fine linen shroud against her hollow belly, cradles a pale, still ghost nested in the soft bed of blooms. Against a raven wash, her dreams fume, flare, and seethe a Rothko of color until chased with benevolent light. A Madonna's redemption, flowers that unfist, unfurl, and bring the visitation, on stems that sway, an earthbound array that quickens. She gives all empty arms can hold, lays the flowers down on barren turned earth. She gifts petals for wings.
Thank you, Nancy. I also love Sal's work, and it's so evocative, and I love where you went with that. And our final poet reading also wrote to that same photograph. And it would be so wonderful to hear Judy Kaber from Belfast, Maine, read her poem written to Sal's photograph.
Yeah, it was a very evocative photograph. And I need to also say that the title of my poem is from a poem by Claire Millican called Dry Cleaning. And she's a poet from Owl's Head, Maine. The hollowness of love stays on your hands. Even though you hold the flowers in your hands, head tilted, and even though they're gladiolas, even so, you're not glad. Your hands stay muffled, index finger raised, the rough towel of that night still rubbing your thigh. Even with the dress, the flowers unfurled, catching light, stem green. Even when you try to stay steady-eyed, your face is cut off, and you remember the flutter in your throat when you drank the tumbler of warm milk to cover wickedness. Even the gold light outside, the day you stood on the edge of the stream, feet in mud, hands clenching reeds, and a tunnel emerged, and you thought you could press your face in the water, your whole body a closet of regrets, pulled down by the line of stones in your belly, even the swell of your hair over your shoulder, the hope for seeds in the lips of the flowers, even the shiver of blood, the man's hand, the fractured morning, even the clock on the wall refusing to tell time, even this stays on your hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. That the line about your whole body, a closet of regrets, got gorgeous. And that's our poets reading today. So we're gonna take some questions from the chat. And I might start with, because our last two poets wrote to the same evocative image and went in some different directions. And the image was a photograph. So, you know, it's a different kind of writing to a photograph than a painting. There's something maybe more literal, even though Sal's photographs, you're not seeing the head, you're only seeing the body. But, you know, there's something more literal about a photograph than a painting to write that sends you in a different kind of storytelling direction, would you say?
I'll answer that. I don't really feel that there really is a big difference. Art to me is art. And I was surprised that I selected a photograph instead of one of the other painting artworks. I think that what brings me to write is the visceral response I got looking at the photograph and the subject. The way the light was centered on the abdomen, near the heart of the person, their face in shadows, clearly very young, dressed in a shapeless shift, just kind of spoke to me and made the poem come out on its own. So I think the interpretation of the artist who took the photograph, just spoke to me in that way, and led to the poem. And I think it could have been that way with a painting as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think it matters whether it's a photograph or a work of art. I'm very much a narrative kind of poet. I do write lyrical poetry too, but I tend much more towards narrative. And so when I see something like that, where you have only a certain portion of a person showing, and really there's a lot that's not known, it does draw you in to make you want to tell some kind of story.
And I felt like your story had a lot there that went beyond the photograph. And can you tell me a little bit about your process or how that story came into your mind?
I think just in looking at the photograph, and thinking about who this person was, and just building from there, it just one part of it just follows another.
So I would love to hear from any of our amazing poets that read today a little bit more about your process, or how you came across, how you selected the work of art, or anything else that you would like to share about this process of writing an ekphrastic poem. Meghan.
Sorry, sure. I love writing ekphrastic poetry. And for me, what I do, it's fairly simple and intuitive, right? I just look at the images until one of them feels like it's some kind of reflection of something that I either have experienced or experience internally. And I was looking through the paintings, and I was more particularly interested in the paintings just because for me, there's something about brush strokes that feels, that just resonates as expressive, and there's movement. And so I was looking at the paintings, and then when I got to the one, the blue kitchen, I felt like I was looking into a memory, even though it wasn't exactly a memory. It was a memory of something that I had to write the poem to discover what it was. And so that's how I choose the poem. The painting, something just arrests me and makes me want to discover why. And so that's how I came about it. And I just suddenly had this sense of my mother and I in a kitchen at dusk, and there it was.
I love that whole idea of a poem as a process of discovery. So, you're responding to something, but you don't know what exactly that is until you write it. That is lovely. Robbi, you wanted to say something also.
Yeah, since you said that, yes, it's sort of like that for me. I conceive of a question usually when I do ekphrastic work. I look at it and I choose the work because it evokes questions that I'm interested in pursuing. And that's why I chose that photograph, because it's intense and mysterious, and it required some kind of answer to the question. But I'm also narrative, and so yes, I like photographs, but I also do a lot of ekphrastics about art, including abstract art.
Nice. Lindsay, you have your hand up too to answer that question.
Yeah, I really love this conversation. I loved so many of those paintings, but I think what drew me to Lillian, and I think Meghan, you were talking about this too, in a way, is a part of myself opened up when I looked at that young woman. And, you know, I fancy myself a swimmer of sorts, but what I really love is being in open water and losing my sense of autonomy with my body. So I kind of took her to this other place that I imagined being inside her mind, where her mind and my mind kind of melded into this world. So a little bit of speculative poetry too, which I find very, you know, like Bridget McGee Kelly, these poets who just blow open worlds. And I just find that very interesting. And these paintings, really, so many of them do that too.
I love that. You know, I'm a swimmer too, and an open water swimmer, and that feeling of being lost, and your poem just took me there. Yeah. Matt, you wanted to say something on this topic too?
Sure. So I was drawn to the painting that I wrote about, Emily. I think for a couple of reasons. One is I looked at all the artwork online. You know, most of the time I think I'm really attracted to landscapes, but this was so different. But I think the one thing that caught me was, so I'm not a writer professionally. I have a scientific background. So just trying to figure out what that was in that image, which turned out to be the cactus, and then what type of cactus this was, the organ pipe cactus, and what it was doing there with the snowy egret, and what it was doing there with Emily Dickinson, of course, that really iconic image of there. Sort of discovered that there's this organ pipe cactus national monument that I had never heard about in Arizona. And then it was just a bit of a challenge in the poem to, I had always thought of it as kind of a dream that you could combine the two things, the snowy egret and something from the Northeast and the wetlands with a desert plant. But how would we get there with the narrative? And that's when I thought of this idea. Okay, I'm going out with Emily. She's my girlfriend. Pick her up at her house in Amherst, Massachusetts, and we drive on a road trip to Arizona. And the poem just kind of flowed from there.
So interesting the way you connected the dots in this particular painting, which is about a poet, you know, and I wish we had Christopher Muir on here. I don't think we do, but if you are, speak up, because I'd be very curious to say, you know, I understand why he chose to put those same elements in there, and to see you respond to making a way to connect them was great.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
We had a question in the chat that I think people have been answering for people that live in Maine, whether they saw the work in person or online. But there was also a question in the chat about the process of revision, and how did that factor in your process of writing these ekphrastic poems?
About revision. How did revision come to?
I'm sorry, who was that? Sheila, if you're speaking, you're muted.
Megan has her hand up, Meg.
Yeah, yeah.
Sheila's unmuted now. Sheila, go ahead. Oh, now you're muted again.
When you say revision, do you mean looking at it more than once, or what do you mean by revision?
Yes, I think Ellen Goldsmith asked this question. She was saying the poems were so great, I'm interested in revision. Ellen, is there something specific about revision that you would love to hear the poets speak to?
No, I mean, there was a time limit, I think, from when people wrote it and when they had to get it in. And I just wondered about, the process, looking at it again, whether a lot of that was in the preparation, what happened afterwards.
So those are good questions. I feel like I did it. You're right. I mean, we had a short window to respond to a piece. So I feel like, when I can feel that there's something to discover inside me, it's the moment that all poets want. It's that pause that the poem then fills. And so when I have that sensation, which is why I love ekphrastic work, because you're given this image to kind of work from, to dive into yourself. So I sort of quickly got my images down, and then I guess it's sort of like the Michelangelo process. Like I just kept chipping away until I got to the poem and the essentials of it, and just quickly sloughing away anything that felt that it wasn't inherent to this sensation I was trying to get across of this darkening room and these two women and the distance between them and the light. That was what I wanted to evoke. And when I got to the end and I chipped all the extra stuff away, it was just there. And I mean, could I work on it more? Of course, but there's a certain point where I feel like we have to let our babies go. Part of the life cycle of the poem. And this was something I was writing for this. And I was like, all right, I have gotten you to the essentials. Good luck. Fly, right? So that was the process, if that made any sense.
Yeah, I really like that, because there is something about having a very short deadline that frees us up in a way to let that baby go, as you said, and fly.
But sorry, Meg,
Go ahead.
Meg, I didn't really understand what you're getting at, but now I know. Basically, it was a really just a knee-jerk reaction, if you like, to the artwork. It's what I felt. Probably it's a subconscious feeling as well that comes into my interpretation of it. And so I didn't do really any revision much on it at all, if anything. It just, the way it melted, I think, as you're saying, Meghan, it's the way you react to it almost immediately. So when I go into an art gallery, I either know whether I can really feel something for that painting. So it's an emotional response. And this one particularly with a psychological aspect to it for me. And it just, it's brought that out. I know not anybody else would perhaps see, although Annaliese saw a dark side to it as well. So I think a lot of it comes from within, your response to whatever painting you're writing about, a piece of artwork or something. And so, yeah, I just wrote it out. And so it was a short deadline. And, have to confess, I did just write it out, really.
I love that. And many people would be very jealous. Annaliese, I think, wants to say something.
I just want to say that I think each one of us has our own version of revision or how we work, very much like how we write. For me, in writing anything, prose or poetry, once my first line or a version of it arrives, and I say it this way all the time, it's like I've been on the train platform and suddenly I'm on the train, I just don't know where I'm going. But we all have our own version of revision also. And I think whether it's a truncated version that we applied to our system because of the time limit, it's still our system that we used because we don't know how to do it individually any other way. It's really how we're made. And I think that probably we each showed up in our own way to handle it as best we could, given the time limit.
That's great. You know, when we ran the chapbook contest, a lot of the people that entered or the finalists said that the constraints were part of what allowed them to be really creative. And I wonder if there are constraints. There's constraints of an image that you're responding to, and there's a constraint of a short time frame. And I wonder if anybody wants to speak about how you are creative in the face of constraints, or whether that, you know, makes you not be creative or wish you hadn't had constraints.
I would, Kathleen.
Yes.
I would just say that so much of what I write, if it's ekphrastic poetry, and probably everything I do is ekphrastic poetry or prose, because I've never been able to separate out the word and the image. I don't know how the poem showed up on the page. I know that's an old cliche, but it just happened. And I alluded to this before. It just happened. It was my dialogue with the image that I had online of the painting, but it was also with myself. It was also with everything that was revealing itself to me, but I didn't know what it was until I got to the end. That's why my poems are short. They're a burst of energy or a burst of looking at something. And when I got to the end, I knew it was the end, because that's all I wanted to say. And the revision was very small. The rhythm of the poem, the way people haven't seen that, the way it was written was very short, sometimes one word in a line, because that's the way I felt. I was picking out those threads of the painting. And I found it to be one of the most pleasurable experiences that I've had. So the short time frame was perfect.
I agree with that.
So somebody's asking if any of the artists are on, and I don't know that, but I would like to invite, if there are artists on, if you might raise your hand, and if you wanted to say something about this experience, that would be welcome. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Margaret.
Well, I'm not one of the artists, but I wanted to respond to a comment or a question in the chat from Erica, I think, about conferring with or connecting with the artist in the process of writing. And I love that last year I did this, and the artist, the Poets Corner readers picked my poem and the artist didn't. And it didn't, for whatever reason, it didn't speak to that artist. And this year, it worked out, both the Poet Corner and the artist. And I love that the artists get to pick, because it's so unique that you're responding to their work. And I think that that's a wonderful part of the process. And after my poem had been selected was when the artist and I connected and just started talking about art and apple trees.
Great. I understand that Colin Page is on. Colin, if you're on.
Yes.
Great. Would you?
I'm actually on Kirsten. I'm on Kirsten Serby's phone. So Kirsten and Lisa and I from the gallery are all sitting together listening and loving the whole event. So just so you know, we're all here and enjoying it. From an artist's point of view, I was talking to David Graham Baker yesterday about choosing his poem and reading through all the poems about his work. I've talked to some of the other artists about it, and it is very strange for us to have something in mind that we're working on in a painting, and then get all these, I don't know, I probably had 10 poems about one of my paintings, and there were a couple of sort of similar takes, some very different takes, you realize how much the viewer of any piece of art is bringing their own story to it. You know, we might have a story we're trying to tell, or that were sort of, that drives us to make the piece, but that's not necessarily what anybody else gets out of it. And it's almost like refreshing to realize that what we are trying to do doesn't actually matter that much, because it's really how the viewer or writer in this case is responding. So I think this is an absolutely fascinating project from my point of view.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank you and Kirsten and Lisa for all your work on this, and for this hosting this and putting together the exhibition. There's such a variety of art in the exhibition that I love that people can respond in different ways to different pieces. And I don't know if there's any piece of art that didn't have a response, but you don't tell us that. But some of them got so many more different multiple responses. That's kind of exciting.
Well, it's fun for us to choose which paintings go in the show, because we're trying to get a variety of types of paintings and types of feelings and things that feel evocative in one way or another. But it's a strange show to curate. You know, most of our shows have a visual idea about them, and we're looking at a painting or a sculpture and just thinking, well, does this look like something I'd write a poem about? And it's a very strange bar to meet for the artwork, but it's a real joy for us to host it. So I'm really glad that you guys are willing to pair up with us and do it together.
Well, I love it. And I love that. I can't wait to hear the artist selections reading, and hope that more of the artists will be present for that in the gallery. We had a question come up earlier. Are you planning to record that or live stream it in any way?
We're going to try to record it. Yes. Yeah.
Great. Wonderful. And somebody also put a comment. One of our poets put a comment. Robbi said that she's done Ekphrastic in the other direction too, with the artists making images in response to
that's interesting.
Their poems. That might be something we might consider in the future.
That would be fun to figure out a way to play with that for next year. I like that.
And I've done that too, Meg, and it's wonderful.
I love all the ideas that get generated from this, and what you said, Colin, about as an artist, not knowing how somebody's going to respond, or the story that each of your viewer brings, it might be very different. I think that's true for poets too, that you write a poem and you're thinking one thing, but the person hearing it is also bringing their whole background and story to it. Do any of you want to comment on an experience of that with your poetry? Sheila, your box is lit up. Did you want to say something?
Not at the moment.
No.
No. Got my poetry.
So anybody have, people reading, have people comment on your poetry and have them see something that you didn't see in the poem?
All the
JC?
time.
Yeah.
I don't think that's happened.
I was paired up with a person who interpreted a poem that I wrote when a friend of ours and her husband lost their son to suicide. And he did a very lengthy video based on it. And it was a very unusual feeling for me because he took it to a place I didn't expect at all. And I think that's what's so intriguing about this, if you do it in a complementary kind of way, that you, and I don't mean that with an I, with an E, complementary way, that you don't know. And so the comments that came from Page Gallery, I think are very appropriate. You even as a poet, what you write can resonate with one person and completely leave another cold, and it's exactly the same thing in the other direction. But I think it's a real process of mutual discovery. And so, I mean, I walked away and I learned a lot because I hadn't seen what my counterpart saw.
I find that's true sometimes in my writing, that somebody says, sees a metaphor that I didn't see, or, something that, just came out intuitively, but I wasn't realizing it was there.
I think also what's happened with me, Meg, and everybody, when I've realized now what you were saying, especially if you're writing some personal experience that actually you're putting across, I've written a book while I was sleeping, just a poetry book while I was sleeping. It's actually about unmarried mothers whose children were adopted at birth and they were taken from them. And it's a personal story from way back in my family where something happened like that. And the people that asked to read that book because they knew someone or had something happen like that. So in a way, they related to those poems, and I hadn't realized just the effect that would have on other people because I was writing a story from my family's perspective. But actually, it rebounded out. There were sort of shock waves everywhere where people were actually saying, I'd like to read more of those because that's happened to me or my friend or something like that. So from that point of view, I've had that reaction.
Yeah, that it resonates somewhere deeply in someone else with their story. But when you first started, I think you said the title was While I wrote this while I was sleeping or something like that.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, she can write while she's sleeping.
Probably. I have to go to sleep after I've been writing.
It's a great title. And so many people, a lot of people have to leave now, and that's fine. And I just want to thank a couple of our poets have had to leave, and I want to make sure I've thanked all of our poets and that have read today. They just fabulous. And I want to thank everyone who submitted. It's pretty, I won't say arbitrary, but there's a personal things. I had several readers reading with me to select the poems, and there were many, many wonderful poems that didn't end up being in the final selection. So I want to thank everybody who took the time to write, to respond, to submit, and to be here today. But a very special thanks to these poets who read for us today. They were terrific. And I'll stay on a little bit longer for any questions or comments, but I did notice some people have to get off, so I did want to make sure I said my thank yous there.
Thank you, everybody.
Emily, did you have a comment you wanted to say?
I just wanted to thank you for doing this. This was a really fun, I get your emails and I've come to some other things on Zoom. I live in Charlottesville, Virginia now, but I grew up in Maine. I just so happened to see that my favorite college professor, Kathleen March, who actually was my Spanish professor, not my poetry professor, or art professor, but I think she could have done either. But she was my Spanish professor and took me to Honduras several times, had entered this, and so I spied her name on the list, and so it was so neat to be able to hear her voice again and hear her voice in poetry. And just so thank you for keeping some of these things on Zoom. It's a nice way to stay connected to Maine and the people that I miss and love in Maine. So thank you.
Thank you. I love that we can reach out way beyond Maine and keep those connections. And my husband is just driving home from Charlottesville today, or yes, he started out yesterday. So we have family down there too. So
May I respond? This is Kathleen.
Absolutely, Kathleen.
I'm trying not to cry because Emily knows we have a long history, and I'm just thrilled that she took the time with her big family and her obligations to even be here. But of course, she comes from a literary family and her father and so on. And I only know her mother because she went to Honduras too. So I think that what I'm trying to say is that art and poetry bring people together in ways that we don't expect. And so I'm grateful for those words from Emily, but I'd also like to say that what's missing for me, and I don't have to have it, but what's missing is I had another poem to Hannah's work, and I had a poem to another artist. It might be too much to ask, but I would love to know their impressions. It might be a 1-line or a 2-line. Did I get it, or did they like it? Do you know what I'm trying to say? It's just like, was it something that you enjoyed reading? Because I certainly enjoyed writing, and I probably could have written many more poems, which would have been far too many. But I'm just grateful, more grateful that I can say for this opportunity. And Emily was just the icing on the cake.
Well, it's wonderful that you two connected, because that is the mission of the Poets Corner, is to create community, and that poetry and art does connect us. And sometimes we can respond to everything, but usually we can't respond to everything. And many people submitted many poems from one person. I'm so glad that we made these selections and that you all were able to read today.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll have to say goodbye to everybody. We enjoyed.
Thank you, Meg.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks for being here from England. And thank you all for being here. And don't forget, December 4th, the Rilke reading will be wonderful. So